Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I'm Ian DeMars alongside co-host Ryan Solomon. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Not doing too bad. We get to talk about more Alliance of American Football, so that's always exciting.
Yes, but before we get to the Alliance, obviously got to talk about the NFL. And a big thing that happened this past weekend, and it was that Eric Reid and Colin Kaepernick have both settled their grievance cases against the NFL. Now, Ryan, we've kind of gone back and forth on this over not just the past couple weeks, but for quite some time now. So I want to get your immediate reaction to what are your thoughts on what this means going forward for either one of these athletes?
Well, I think that a big thing we can take away from this is that they both sort of realized that they weren't getting anywhere with their case. So they decided that they could get whatever they wanted to get out of it and then basically let it just kind of drift away, because we didn't really see a clear-cut case for collusion for either of these players. I mean, Eric Reid actually got signed by a team, so that kind of eliminated any case that he had there. And Colin Kaepernick, like I said, seems like he just wants to stir up more controversy and trouble wherever he is, and not even necessarily play in the NFL again. He just wants to be a public figure, essentially. So I think he realized that this thing people were starting to not talk about anymore. He just decided it was time to let it go. I think going forward, this actually will make it easier for somebody to sign Colin Kaepernick if they decide they want to do that. Like I said last week, he hasn't played in the NFL in a number of years. So I'm not sure if you want a aging backup quarterback with social justice things hanging over his head still in your locker room. But if you do, this makes him easier to sign now that he doesn't have a grievance currently with the NFL.
Yeah, and looking at this, obviously, I think it was a statement for both these players. Look at Eric Reid. I mean, obviously, he signed at the beginning part of last year after Carolina had gone through a number of injuries in their secondary. Played great and got a contract that he definitely deserved. Colin Kaepernick, obviously, a lot of people had thought that maybe could be a valuable backup on some teams. But there were also reports this weekend that kind of made me change my thought on the Kaepernick stance. Now, as I've said before, I've kind of thought that he should have been in the NFL. But there were reports this week that the Alliance actually offered Colin Kaepernick an opportunity to play in the league this year. And everyone in that league gets the same contract. It's a 3-year contract. I believe it's for $250,000, and they're non-guaranteed deals. Colin Kaepernick countered the AAF, and he said, I'll play for you, but I want $20 million. So I think out of all of this, obviously, I think some of these players might have wanted some money or something, but after hearing that from Colin Kaepernick, it kind of makes me wonder, was this all about money for Kaepernick, or what exactly was it? Because the fact that he wanted $20 million for a developmental league kind of is a really big stretch on his part.
Right, and like it seemed to be the point where he was just saying it so that he didn't have to play. So like almost like he had a reason to say no to it, because I don't think he honestly wants to play football. I think he just wants to be in the public spotlight so that he can just stay famous. Because we saw him sort of tampering with the halftime show of the Super Bowl too, trying to tell people what they should and should not be able to do and say, or who should or should not be performing. This guy just wants to be relevant. I don't think that he wants to be part of, like, his desire to play and be involved does not stem from the fact that he loves the sport of football. It stems from the fact that he wants to be relevant.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you now at this point. It took me a while to kind of start getting into that point where we actually agreed on things. We've kind of been back and forth on this for quite some time. But after hearing that news about what he wanted from the Alliance, and obviously some of the stuff that you had mentioned before, it's starting to make a little bit more sense, to the point where it's getting to that point where, does he get a chance to play again? Maybe, but a lot of this is whenever he gets mentioned, he's going to be a main focal point when it comes to sports news, for sure.
And like I said, the whole thing people started to realize, like NFL sportscasters, people that talked about the NFL started to realize that Colin Kaepernick had opportunities to play football, and he really just decided not to with the AAF. And even before that, people started to get tired of what he was doing with the halftime show, like I mentioned. And so I think that the crowd has sort of flipped on Colin Kaepernick, whereas initially a large percentage of people were saying what he did was admirable. Now people are kind of seeing like, well, this guy seems like he was starting to see himself fade out of the spotlight, and he just wanted to find some way to get back in.
Yeah, and despite all of this, there actually have been reports that there is a possibility that some teams could be interested in signing him. There are reports that Carolina could be an example because of the fact that they signed Eric Reid, and their quarterback situation's in question right now because of Cam Newton's shoulder getting surgery this offseason might not be fully ready for the beginning of the season. And then an interesting one that was also mentioned was the New England Patriots. So do you think there's any legit possibility that he could end up on either one of these teams within the next year or so?
Let me ask you this question. Do the Patriots invite the media to come into their locker room and to inspect the team? Out of all the teams in the NFL, are the Patriots one that is welcoming to asking and answering questions on a consistent basis?
You're asking me that question, and yet Bill Belichick's the one coach that avoids answering a lot of questions.
Precisely. So why would Bill Belichick want more attention on the Patriots for a reason other than winning football games? Even when it's about football, he still doesn't want to answer the question. So bringing in a guy who's going to have a media circus following him around does not seem like it would be a good thing for Bill Belichick to do. It doesn't seem like it's within his character. I could potentially see Colin Kaepernick going to the Panthers because Eric Reid is there. Cam Newton, like you said, we don't know the state of his shoulder. We don't know if he's going to be even ready for the season. But that's also a big gamble because, like I said, Eric Reid, a little bit lesser known player. He's not going to be the face of your franchise. Colin Kaepernick, as soon as you bring him in, is suddenly the face of the franchise. And if he does play well, suddenly you have quarterback controversy with Cam Newton and this very controversial figure. So I think at this point, people or teams, NFL owners, executives are going to still shy away from Colin Kaepernick because he's still involved enough with the social justice quest that he's on and to try and be a public figure that he's not worth it still. What he brings to your team in value, you can get with several other players that don't have the extra baggage.
One thing I do want to point out about the Patriots, you mentioned that they don't talk about being in the news quite as much. But look who they traded for this year. They traded for Josh Gordon, and for a decent portion of the season, it seemed like it was going to be a good trade until some issues happened. So
Josh Gordon is not the face of the franchise. He was, at best, an accessory piece to the offense. Colin Kaepernick would suddenly become the face of whichever franchise he goes to because of how polarizing.
But the thing is with that, Josh Gordon used to be the face of a franchise in Cleveland. You could say a few years ago he was the face of the Cleveland Browns after having down seasons. And that's what Colin Kaepernick was with the 49ers. I'm not saying, obviously, he wasn't the face of their franchise, but you don't always have to be the face of the franchise. Even when Colin Kaepernick wasn't starting in his last season with the 49ers, I mean, obviously, yeah, he was shown whenever they were on television, but wouldn't necessarily say he was the franchise whenever he was shown. I mean, like I said, at points in his career, yes, definitely, for sure. But towards that tail end, when you're out in the media like that, I wouldn't necessarily say that makes you the franchise.
But that polarization factor that I'm talking about, where all of a sudden Colin Kaepernick brings people that like him and hate him to watch the Patriots then. So all of a sudden, half of the United States at least does not like the Patriots even more than they already dislike the Patriots because of Colin Kaepernick. Maybe for the Patriots, it could be a good thing because I think most people dislike them. So maybe if they want half the country to suddenly pay attention to them in a more positive way, they could do that. But I just don't think it's something that the Patriots would be willing to do. It's not something they've done in the past. Josh Gordon wasn't polarizing. He was a guy that could have been potentially the face of the franchise with the Browns. You could definitely make that case. But he had personal issues of his own. He wasn't trying to parade himself out there as the leader of a cause. He was just trying to work through stuff on his own. He wasn't the kind of guy that was going around talking about his issues. And that's what Colin Kaepernick's doing. Is Colin Kaepernick wants to be in the spotlight. I don't think Josh Gordon did.
Make a fair point. Like I said, with this case being done, not sure how much we'll hear about Colin Kaepernick in the news going forward, but You do have to assume with the offseason, with the new league season starting in March, possibility of his name comes up again with the team that needs a quarterback. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye out for. But speaking of a player that might be polarizing figure, let's talk about Antonio Brown for a second. So it was noted the same day as this case settling with Kaepernick and Reed was that Antonio Brown noted that he was going to meet with Pittsburgh Steelers owner Art Rooney to discuss the future, kind of go through some things. There were reports that there were other members of the head of the team that were there as well as Antonio Brown's agent. Now, it came to the conclusion that both sides actually have agreed that it's best for both of them to move on going forward. And it seems like the Steelers are going to try to do what they can to negotiate a trade to get Brown out of Pittsburgh. It seems like the team's going to do what they can on their end. Antonio Brown isn't going to try doing anything on his end. Although shortly after, or I believe it was that night after they had met, he had actually went live on Instagram and posted a video. It seemed like it was him working out, just saying a bunch of stuff, saying how he wants to go to a team that has a lot of guaranteed money and be the star for that team. So first, let's talk about the whole meeting situation. Are you surprised that both the Steelers and Antonio Brown have finally decided that it's best for them to split?
I mean, I feel like it's sort of like any breakup, though. Like when you tell your friends and the public about it, even if you didn't want to break up, the fact that somebody did sort of makes both parties say, yeah, this is an amicable split. We decided together. And I think that's what's sort of happening here, because realistically, if there was a chance to keep Antonio Brown and he wasn't going to be disruptive, don't you think the Steelers would want to have that sort of talent on their roster? I mean, for a while, he was the guy in Pittsburgh, even with players like Le'Veon Bell around, Ben Roethlisberger around, stars on defense around. I mean, he was the guy. He was like the top receiver in the NFL. And the fact that the Steelers can say, yeah, we don't really want the guy anymore, I think that's more of a testament to the fact that Brown wants out so bad. Don't you think so? I just see this as Brown wants out. The Steelers are basically saying, yeah, the fact that you don't want to be here so much makes us say that we're going to have to get rid of you. I don't think it's like if Brown wanted to be there, the Steelers would happily have him, I think.
Yeah. Here's the thing. With the Steelers, they've kind of been through this situation recently with Le'Veon Bell. Obviously, it's a little bit different because the last couple of years, Bell's contract has been up, and each year they've decided to franchise tag him or attempt to get him to sign a franchise tag. And it became clear this year that Bell didn't want to become a part of that team. He was mentioned a lot in the news during the NFL season. And then later on in the season, Antonio Brown started to become aware of this. We've seen issues with him on the field and off the field before. And it started to get really out of hand with his social media game. So I think the Steelers are at that point where they don't want to, because remember, Brown's still on contract for, I believe it's at least 2 or 3 years. So they don't want to possibly go through this for 2 to 3 years and have that team start to crumble. They obviously did make the playoffs this year. More than likely, it seems likely you're not going to get Le'Veon Bell back. And Brown obviously doesn't want to be there. So obviously the best thing to do would be trade him, get what you can while you can with him on your roster, so that in a couple of years he doesn't just walk away. So I think it's a smart move by Pittsburgh to actually agree to this because, like I said, they don't want to go through any more drama. They went through drama this whole season with Le'Veon Bell, and then at the end of the season with Bell and Antonio Brown. So they need to get a fresh start, and trading Antonio Brown is a perfect way to do that. Now, going to what he posted on social media after, because he had tweeted that things went well, it was a mutual decision, and both thought it was best for them to move forward. And then you look at the video, and he's kind of contradicting himself. So I'm not really sure what to think of what Brown has to say on this, but I think it's a good move by both to just end this already.
Yeah, and let's put it this way, it's messy. And the more that he hangs around, it's going to be more messy. And that's what we saw with the Le'Veon Bell situation. I think that's what we're going to see eventually, too, with Odell Beckham Jr. in New York, too, is eventually something is going to happen that's going to be messy, and he's going to want out, or the team's going to want to get rid of him. But the fact that this has gotten all jumbled up with Antonio Brown first even requesting a trade demand, you can't even have a guy on your team like that knowing that they want to be somewhere else, doing something else, getting more money somewhere else. It's just too distracting in your locker room. And the Steelers find themselves in this awkward transitional period now where they have some of the pieces of their former team. They still have Ben Roethlisberger. We don't know how long he'll be around, but for now he's there. They have Juju Smith-Schuster. They have a defense that's relatively young. They have James Conner, who's young and looks like he could be a potential star for that offense. So they're eventually going to have to transition completely away from the team that they had of old. But for now, they're going to hold on to as many pieces as they can. But they're going to have to make sure they get value, at least for Antonio Brown.
That's true. Remember, nothing can really become official and really come to agreement until March when the new league season starts. But this whole topic about Antonio Brown led to our question of the week this past week, which looked at what conference he's going to play in. The majority of our viewers on Facebook and Twitter agree that they believe that he's going to switch conferences and go to the NFC. Facebook, it was 75% saying NFC. Twitter was higher at 85%. I know last week we had discussed a couple of teams that would make sense for him. I know 49ers were mentioned. Packers were a possibility. Do you think there's any other NFC team that could pose a threat to get Brown?
You never really know because we didn't really see the Cowboys go after Amari Cooper until we realized that the Cowboys went after Amari Cooper. So let's think about a couple other teams that are looking for a big play threat at wide receiver who think they're one or two pieces away. I want to throw two of them out here to you. One is the team that just went for Amari Cooper, and that's the Dallas Cowboys. We decided that collectively, you and I, that they probably don't have the pieces to trade for Antonio Brown, but I know that Jerry Jones would love to get Amari Cooper and Antonio Brown on the same team. So I wouldn't be surprised if he found some way to wheel and deal and get rid of like draft picks until like 2030 to get Antonio Brown on his team. And another team, the Chicago Bears. They got better on offense this year, but they're still a couple players away from having an actually dangerous offense. Think about how much Antonio Brown would help that team. Allen Robinson was okay, but he wasn't the big play threat that he was before he got injured. Bringing a guy like Brown, who you know can produce, would be such a big help for that team.
Yeah, those are definitely some good choices. I think a team that could try and get involved, but not really sure what they do because their quarterback situation is kind of up in the air. I think Washington Redskins could make a fair argument. That's because you look at that team, you can't really name a receiver that was dominant for them last year. They signed a couple of guys in the offseason, but none really did anything for them. They have Jordan Reed, but Jordan Reed kind of had an up and down year for that team. They were playing well with Alex Smith, and then they didn't when he got injured. So it's kind of a toss-up on if they would go after him without knowing what's going to happen with Alex Smith. Obviously, it looks like he might miss a portion of this season. His backup, McCoy, who suffered a similar injury, could miss a portion of the season. They signed Mark Sanchez, who didn't play well, and then they signed Josh Johnson out of the AAF, who played okay, but I don't see him necessarily being a full season starter.
I mean, they hope that at some point Josh Johnson can do it. He has made big plays in the past. He's shown flashes of it, but I don't see, like you said, he may never actually start every game in a season.
Yeah, so that's just something we'll have to keep an eye out for. And obviously, a lot of things can happen before the official new season starts in the NFL. So that's something that should be should be looked at over the next little under a month until that new league season starts. But let's talk about a signing that recently happened. That was the Cardinals making an offensive move. They signed former Buffalo Bills tight end Charles Clay. Do you think this is a good move?
Sure, why not? When you have a young quarterback, and they're going to have a young quarterback regardless of if they stick with Josh Rosen or if they somehow trade Josh Rosen and end up with Kyler Murray, when you have a young quarterback, you want to surround him with people that are more veteran, that you can rely on to run routes and make big plays. And that's what Clay has done his entire career. And sure, he's not the same guy that he used to be making big plays back when he was with Buffalo. I think it was probably Buffalo and Miami probably were his two biggest stops, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, when he was with those two teams. But he's still capable of being a dependable target. He's still capable of blocking well. I think he'll only be beneficial to Josh Rosen or Kyler Murray or whoever is there at quarterback for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I think it's a good signing. I mean, I'm not sure how much of an impact it'll be, but you look at that team, they had Jermaine Gresham, who has been a solid blocking tight end, has shown potential as a solid catching tight end, but it seemed like he took a step back this year. They got Ricky Seals-Jones, or drafted him a couple of years ago. He kind of took a step back after a strong finish to his rookie season. So it's a good signing. They need some playmakers, and he's a solid veteran that could boost that offense, even if it is only a little bit. It boosts the offense for them.
Yeah, I think that we both agree on that one being a pretty solid signing. But I brought up Kyler Murray, and some news with Kyler Murray, which seems to happen like every couple days, came out in regards to the combine, and that's that Kyler Murray may not throw at the combine. So there was questions on whether or not he was actually going to do anything at the combine, considering the fact that his stats, when you look at his physical abilities in terms of height, in terms of most likely jumping ability, is not going to be that great. Do you think he should actually throw at the combine, or do you think he should refrain from throwing?
It's a tough question because we see this typically every year with a lot of the top quarterbacks, or assumably top quarterbacks in the league. I can remember a couple years ago where I remember the year Teddy Bridgewater was in the combine. I don't believe he threw in the combine, but when he came to his pro day, he threw. And you wonder what, he didn't look as impressive, and part of it was because he was throwing with a glove on indoors. So that was kind of a question mark on how he's going to be able to continue that in the NFL. And yet that was at his pro day. So part of me wants to see him do something. Throwing, I think, actually could be beneficial for him because obviously he put up some solid numbers, but I don't think the combine's really going to hurt him. Yeah, it might hurt with some of his measurements and stuff, but some of the numbers he could put up could be phenomenal. I'm looking forward to seeing him run the 40 this year. I think he's going to put up a very fast 40 time. Some of his other athletic abilities, I think, could be solid numbers at the combine as well. So I don't think he should try hiding it. I just think it gets mentioned because he's one of the top prospects, and some of these top prospects avoid doing some of these things because they only want to show it one time. So I think Kyler Murray, he's such a dynamic athlete that I think it would actually benefit him to throw at the combine.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think furthermore, any team that is in love with Kyler Murray already is still going to be in love with Kyler Murray after they see him throw. I don't think there's going to be too much of a surprise there. Like, this isn't a guy that's been away from the game for a while. We saw what he could do all season. We saw what he could do in the college football playoff. People that like Kyler Murray already and want to draft him will most likely not change their mind when they actually figure out that he's 5'8.5" instead of 5'9".
Yeah, and that's probably the main one that's going to be discussed on how he measures and stuff. Because obviously, we talk about not a big quarterback. There's been a history of not that many big quarterbacks having success in the NFL. But you wonder what? There actually have been a lot of success stories from smaller quarterbacks in the NFL that currently are playing in the NFL. So this doesn't hurt him if he tries to do it.
Yeah, there's not a lot quite as small as Kyler Murray, but you can see that now smaller quarterbacks are able to get more clear lanes to throw in by moving the pocket around, by switching protection up. There's ways to get around being smaller in the NFL. So you're seeing measurements not really play as big a factor, even though on paper, and when you look at them, you say, wow, that guy is really short. I wonder how he's going to play. I think GMs are starting to look through that a little bit, and they're starting to look for guys with more intangible stuff rather than measurables.
Yeah, and I mean, something I can think of with like a major star. I look at the NBA when Kevin Durant came to me, when he got drafted in the NBA, because when he was doing some of his stuff at the combine, apparently he couldn't bench 225. And you look at what he is today, he's one of the best players in the league. So just because you don't put up a good number or a good measurement doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to have success.
And you see the guys, too, with the measurements that are unbelievable, like Darius Hayward-Bay with the speed that he showed at the Combine, turned out to be complete garbage in the NFL. So you can't always trust that one mind-blowing stat or the one question mark that you have about a player.
Yeah, and this leads into our next topic. So speaking of Kyler Murray, since we are starting to get closer to that time of the year of the NFL draft, we're going to start giving out our rankings for each group of prospects. So this week we're going to look at the quarterbacks. We're going to give our top 5 lists. Ryan, how about you go first with your top 5 lists of quarterbacks?
Sure, I'll go from. Did you say you want to order 1 through 5?
Whatever you want to do.
I'll go 5 to 1. So at number 5, I have a guy that can throw the ball and run the ball for a lot of extra points, and that's Deshaun Watson of the Houston Texans. When he was a rookie, we saw him absolutely light up the stat sheet until he got injured. And then last season, he actually had a pretty productive season again, ranking, I believe it was in the top 10 for quarterbacks, if I'm not mistaken. Let me take a
look. Ryan, didn't mean to cut you off. Are you confusing a different or later subject with our current subjects?
You said top quarterbacks, right?
Yeah, for the draft.
Oh, you're talking about the draft? I thought you were talking about fantasy draft.
No, not yet. We're not getting to that yet.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about fantasy football because I have to defend my titles.
I know you do, Ryan. I know you do.
Looking at the draft, rather, there's the more obvious ones to go with. I'm going to give you my top 3, I think. Okay, so first, I'm going to start with number 3. I'm going to actually go Dwayne Haskins at number 3. And he's the guy right now that a lot of people are picking to be number 1. They say that because he had such a good year at Ohio State, he's going to be the top quarterback taken. It's kind of unanimous. I look at him and I think about a lot of other quarterbacks that Ohio State's had. They've had Terrell Pryor, didn't pan out as a quarterback. They had Troy Smith, didn't really pan out as a quarterback. And where Haskins is a little better is he's less adept at moving with his legs, but he's a better pocket passer. So I could see him having more success in the NFL compared to his other alma mater counterparts. But I still think that there are going to be some other quarterbacks that are going to edge him out here. At number 2, I have Kyler Murray because I think that what he brings to the table in terms of his actual ability to throw combined with his ability to get out of the pocket and move is something that we see more in a Russell Wilson type player. So he's pretty dynamic from both a passing and a rushing perspective. And then at number 1, I actually have Drew Lock. I really liked what I saw from Drew Lock down the stretch, and I think he fits the mold of a quarterback, sort of like a Matt Ryan, sort of like a Joe Flacco in his prime, or closer to an Aaron Rodgers, where he kind of breaks down the field and then makes throws based on what he sees before it happens, as opposed to more of a reactionary type player. So I think he's one of the probably less touted guys right now, but people are starting to get a little bit more high on Drew Lock. I could see him going late first round or early second round. I think whoever gets him is going to be able to develop him, and I think he'll be a really solid starter in the NFL at some point.
Yeah, definitely I would say they're in that top 5 area. I was a little surprised with your order, but you do make some solid points, and I do kind of see where you thought I meant fantasy football as I had listed top 5 quarterbacks 2019. So I get what you meant by that, but we'll talk about that at the end of towards the end of the show. So I'll give you my top 5 list. Number 5, I have Will Grier from West Virginia. I've seen this guy play the last couple of years, not just at West Virginia, but when he was at Florida. And this guy was putting up phenomenal numbers. Against the SEC opponents, he did very well. And against Big 12 opponents, he was able to put up numbers as well. It would be the question marks with him are he's a Big 12 quarterback. Can he relate that to the NFL? That's something we'll have to see, but I think he can do a solid job wherever he gets drafted. I have Daniel Jones from Duke at number 4. This guy has a big quarterback body. He put up some very solid numbers the last few years at Duke, and I think he could be a guy that could sneak into the first round because of his size. Number 3, I have a guy you had number 1, Drew Lock. I do like him. I think he's going to go on. I think he's underrated, and I think he gets valued less because of his team's record. And honestly, when I compare him to a guy that got drafted first in the NBA, and that's Ben Simmons, because I think he has a lot of talent and could be a first-round pick, should be a first-round pick, but he didn't play on the best teams. in the SEC like Ben Simmons in the NBA. So I think that's why he gets diminished a little bit. Number two, I have Dwayne Haskins. The reason why I have him number two is because we saw some at points some inconsistencies from him. And remember, he hasn't started many games in college. So we really don't know what to expect from him. Uh, Remember, Mitch Trubisky, it took him over a year to finally get into a groove with the Chicago Bears. And it's still a question on if he can develop that and continue that into his third year. And then number one, I have Kyler Murray. And the reason I have him there is because he's dynamic. He's a phenomenal athlete. And he might not have – he basically has the same amount of starts as Dwayne Haskins, but we saw him play in games the previous year when Baker Mayfield was quarterback. In fact, he started a game, I believe it was the last regular season game, and what did he do on his first drive? He took him down the field, and I believe he ran one in for 70 yards. So this guy has phenomenal skills. I think this guy is going to be a great player in the NFL. I'm not sure if he's going to be the first quarterback. There are some question marks. But overall, I think he's the best quarterback in this draft.
I think what helps him too is the relative success of Baker Mayfield. So people had questions about Mayfield for his size, and he sort of fits a similar mold of Kyler Murray. He makes plays with his legs, can also throw from the pocket. And I think the fact that they're coming from the same system, and we saw that he was able to translate to the NFL last year, is only going to help Kyler Murray.
Yeah, very true. And looking at the most recent ESPN mock draft, I believe there were 4 quarterbacks that were taken in the first round. So it'll be interesting to see if those continue over the next few or a couple of months. We do tend to see these mock drafts change everywhere, not just ESPN, but other websites. I know our a guy who used to be on the show, Ellie Knock Money, always has a mock draft that comes out. If you haven't checked out Knock Money Football, definitely take a check out. He typically posts a new mock draft every few weeks or so. So definitely keep an eye on that. Maybe we'll get him on before the draft as well.
The Knock Draft.
We could call that, or we can make that the theme for that episode. But let's switch gears and talk about the Alliance now. So the week 2 is done. We had a lot of it. All the games were very exciting. All of them featured comeback victories. We saw the Birmingham Iron come back from an early deficit to win at home against the Salt Lake Stallions. We saw the Arizona Hotshots come from behind on the road against the Memphis Express to pull that game out late. We saw the Orlando Apollos come from behind on the road in San Antonio and win that game. Then we saw the San Diego Fleet come from behind against Atlanta and win in their first home game.
And they finally scored points.
Exactly. They finally scored points. And as a result, we actually both went 3-1 in our weekly picks. So I currently have a 2-game lead going into week 3. But before we talk about week 3, what was the one thing that stood out to you about week 2?
The one thing that stood out to me, other than the fact that the games were actually really competitive and pretty entertaining to watch, was that the number of turnovers in this league so far this year is incredible. Like, if you look at the highlights from these games, there are so many fumbles, interceptions. It feels like there's more than in the NFL. And if you look at the stats, I think per game, you'll find that there are a few more than in the NFL. It kind of reminds me of when you watch college basketball versus professional basketball, where like the shooting percentage in the NBA is so much more, pristine than it is in college basketball, but college basketball is still fun to watch because it's a bunch of guys out there doing it because they love it. That's kind of how I equate this to, is that you see all these guys out there that aren't really good enough to be in the NFL. Some have been in the NFL, and they're just trying their best to win a football game. This is their job. They're not making enormous sums of money out there, but they're trying their best to win it. And so you see more mistakes, but it's okay because both teams are making the mistakes.
Yeah, definitely agree that turnovers were a key thing that stood out. Especially look at the Orlando game. They won that game off a game-winning pick 6. We saw in the Birmingham game that there was a special teams turnover that led to a touchdown that gave them the win. So those were definitely some key points. First thing I want to point out was how about Phil Nelson for the San Diego Fleet with his no look over the head pass
That
that
was
he
something.
completed? That was something that got a lot of news and definitely, I think, sparked that team. Even though it was early in the game, probably didn't have much of a factor in that game. That was something that shows that he's willing to do what he can to help that team win. And I think it was a good decision by San Diego to make him the starter of that team. So that's definitely something to look out for. Watch out for them, especially since they got that offense going this past week.
Plus,
But
it made it to Sports Center, so that
yeah,
was big because I haven't seen a lot of these highlights on ESPN, but that play made it.
yeah, that play did make it. So maybe this could be the start of some more things happen. Another thing I want to point out, we started to see the running game make a big impact. In week one, we didn't see too much from the running game. We did see Trent Richardson in the first week get a couple touchdowns. Look at this past week, we finally had not one, but we had two guys get over 100 yards rushing. A former NFL running back, Zach Stacy, had over 100 yards for the Memphis Express, and then Jaquan Gardner for the San Diego Fleet also ran for over 100 yards, I believe, and I believe it was him in their victory as well. So, yeah, those are definitely something. Trent Richardson also had another touchdown, so that was impressive. So the running backs made a statement this week and could be a big factor going into week three. So now going into week three, we look at our fantasy standings. So Ryan, you won the first week. You won 13-7 over me. You had picked John Wolford. I had picked Luis Perez in our matchup. So Ryan, since you won the first week, you're going to determine who or how each person picks first each week. So this week I'm going to get first no matter what, based off what happened. But going forward, does the person that picked first each week, is it based off of the team that lost the previous week, or the team that's behind in the overall standings?
I think team that lost the previous week should get first pick.
Okay, perfect. So that'll be me this week, and this week we're gonna pick a running back. So, but before we actually do make our picks, let's make our game picks for the week. So, looking at the matchups this week, we actually have we don't we see three matchups of 2-0 teams against 0-2 teams, and then the only matchup of 1-1 teams will go at it. So the games this week, we have Arizona on the road against Salt Lake. Memphis goes on the road to Orlando. Birmingham goes to Atlanta. And San Antonio goes to San Diego in a week one rematch. So what are your picks for this week?
All right. I'm going Arizona to defeat Salt Lake. I'm going to go Orlando to beat Memphis at home, Birmingham to beat Atlanta on the road, and San Antonio to beat San Diego on the road. And I think what we're seeing so far is that there are definitely a couple teams that stand out and are a little bit better than the rest. I would say the big three of this league so far are the 2-0 teams, Orlando and Arizona, and then I'd put Birmingham in the mix too.
Okay. Yeah, so looking at my picks, I'm going to go upset. It might not be an upset, but they played very well the first time they played them. I'm going to go Salt Lake over Arizona. I'm going to go Orlando over Memphis. I'm going to go Atlanta over Birmingham. Then I like San Diego over San Antonio.
Okay. You're riding that backwards pass train in San Diego.
I am, and I want to try getting as big of a lead as I can over you in the picks. But let's go on to the fantasy. So this week we're each going to pick one running back. And based off of what I've seen so far, it's kind of tough to see who would be the best back to pick. But I'm just going to pick this guy because I think he's going to get a touchdown, and I'm going to go with Trent Richardson for Birmingham.
Okay. Trent Richardson does actually have a pretty high amount of carries so far, but he has a fairly low yards per carry average. I'm going to go with the guy that I was actually a big fan of in the NFL, and I drafted him one year for my fantasy team because I thought he was going to be the next big deal running back, and that's Zach Stacy. So Zach Stacy has 5.1 yards per carry so far, 159 yards overall on 31 attempts. So he's been very good. He gets the ball probably more than any other running back in the AAF right now, other than Trent Richardson, who has 42 carries. So I think that he has a lot of upside in terms of he's going to get the ball a lot, and he's been running well so far.
Okay. And yeah, definitely keep an eye out for. I know we posted it on our social media pages that Ryan is currently dominating the league after John Wolford threw for 2 touchdowns. He also had some rushing yards that definitely helped out his totals. Luis Perez didn't turn the ball over, but didn't also find the end zone, so that was kind of tough for me this week. So those will definitely be obviously our guys for the week, so definitely keep an eye on those. And we'll see what happens on whether Ryan expands his league or if I can cut into that league going into.
You know what's funny too, Ian, is that my brother pointed this out. There were reactions to that backward pass in the San Diego game from NFL players, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and he was like, "These guys are just sitting around watching, AAF. Like the pro players are actually somewhat paying attention to what's going on in this alternative football league," which I thought was funny.
Yeah, I definitely think that's quite funny too. It is interesting. There were reports that the league might not have enough money, but they did get a big, huge boost. They got the the Carolina Hurricanes owner from the NFL or from the NHL has committed $250 to the league.
Wow.
So, not sure if that's because of the rumors of them not having enough money, but the fact that he's putting in that much money, I think, tells you that they could possibly see some potential in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, that amount of money, I wouldn't think would just get thrown around willy-nilly. There has to be some sort of actual deep look into the sustainability of this league.
Yeah, and the way we've seen this ratings, it seems like that this could be a possibility. And I think that the attendance in these games are going to improve as well. We saw in San Antonio, the attendance has been phenomenal. I think San Diego is going to get great attendance since football's been gone from there for a couple years. So I think attendances will rise in the league. It's just obviously with it being in a league, it's going to take a little bit of time.
They did do a really good job picking teams that don't really have a big football base at the moment. Like places that are really good sports towns, but don't already always have a football team to cheer for. But like you said, San Antonio, obviously they love the Spurs, so they come out and support that team. Memphis, a lot of the places that they picked, just really good jobs. Like you said, Salt Lake, support the Jazz. So these places already know how to support a sports team, and now they're just getting an extra sport to support. So I think that's the big thing in their favor that they have.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this league continues to develop over this whole season. But we're getting to that point. We're at the end of the show. So now we can talk about our 5 fantasy quarterbacks for 2019. Then also, I want you to either give me one player that was a top 10 player that's going to fall outside the top 10, or someone that was outside the top 10 that's going to fall into the top 10.
Okay. So I'm going to go with my list real quick. Deshaun Watson at number 5. We're back in business. Then Matt Ryan, number 4. Had a sneaky good season last year. Was in the top 10 for fantasy. Aaron Rodgers getting back on his horse with a new coach leading the way there. At number 2, I have Andrew Luck, guy who had a great comeback season. And then, of course, at number 1, Patrick Mahomes.
A very solid list. A lot of it's kind of tough to predict the quarterback list just because we've seen a lot of great quarterback play in fantasy this past year. So it's getting to that point where you could literally pick any quarterback in the top 15 and have a very good team.
Or even in like the top 30, and you can still have a guy that produces even though he might throw some interceptions and might not win a lot of games.
Yeah, as long as you're getting, I'd say at least like 15 points from your quarterback. I mean, obviously that's a good number. So, obviously, those quarterbacks can easily get you that number, and they can easily get you double that number. So, definitely a good list there. Going on my list, number 5, I have Drew Brees from New Orleans. Who knows, this could be his last year. And I think if it is his last year, he's going to go out with a big bang. He's going to put up some huge numbers, and I think he could possibly lead that team to a championship. Number 4, I have Deshaun Watson. This guy has dual threat ability. I think that after a full season healthy this past year, that he's going to improve a lot more. We did see some inconsistencies from him earlier in the year that he did improve on later on. Just a matter of keeping that over a full season. Number 3, I like Aaron Rodgers as well. I think that him being healthy and him having a healthy team plays a factor into his fantasy stats. Number 2, I have Andrew Luck as well. This guy was a comeback player of the year. He's put up huge numbers, and I continue to see him doing that on that offense. If they give him one more solid weapon, you could maybe make an argument he could be number 1, but obviously one agreement. Patrick Mahomes has to be the number 1 quarterback. First full season starter, and he throws for over 50 touchdowns. I mean, this guy never had one bad fantasy game. Even when he threw, he had like 5 turnovers on the Monday night game against the Rams, and he still put up huge fantasy numbers. So when this guy has a quote unquote bad day, it still ends up being a good fantasy day. So you can't really argue that Mahomes is the number.
I can't believe we had the same top 3 in the same order.
Yeah, I was debating flipping Rodgers and Luck, but I just think that the Colts are going to have to rely a lot more on Andrew Luck. This year, it was kind of surprising how the offensive line was able to hold up. I think that has the potential to continue that, but I can just kind of see the Packers. I think that the dual threat ability of them with their running backs is going to be helpful. And I think that they are a team that could play a major threat into getting Le'Veon Bell, which would take a lot of pressure off him.
Yeah, that's possible. Let's go to our player that we think is either going to move into the top 10 or drop out of the top 10. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first with this one. So I think that a player that's going to move out of the top 10, I think a player that moves out of the top 10 is Antonio Brown. This guy's been a dominant player in this league. He's put up huge numbers. And I think this whole wanting a trade is starting to get to him, and I think it could play a factor into how he plays this upcoming season. Putting him in a new venue and just putting him somewhere new might be good for him, but I'm not sure if it's going to be good for his play. It's going to take him some time to develop and build a rapport with his team. So I think that he's going to have a good season, but he's not going to be that top 10 player that we used to see.
That's a good point you raised for sure. I have a guy that I think is going to move back into the top 10, and that's Le'Veon Bell. And it's for basically the same reasons you moved Antonio Brown out, except I have a different spin on it. The fact that he's going to be playing football for some other team, presumably, as long as he doesn't get transition tagged, leads me to believe that he's going to have a really solid season because we know the skill set is there, and we know wherever he goes, he's going to be the featured back. He's going to get his carries. He's going to get his catches. I don't see any way if Le'Veon Bell plays that he's not in the top 10 for fantasy.
Yeah, and I think that's a good factor. It kind of just depends a little bit on where he goes and what kind of system he goes into. Because I think no matter what, he has that potential to be a top 10 player. But if he's in a system and it doesn't work with the way he plays, then it might take a little while for him to get the big game numbers. But we've
also a number of years ago with DeMarco Murray too, when he went to the Eagles, had a great year at the Cowboys, went to the Eagles, and had just an abysmal year. So it does happen.
Yeah, and you might say that could be an issue for Bell, but remember there were times where he missed like the first few weeks of the season or not have his typical numbers because obviously a couple years ago with him holding out. So, but he can bounce back. So even if he does struggle early on, expect him to bounce back. I think that's obvious.
So it sounds like we pretty much agree with our fantasy picks this time around.
Yeah, I mean, since you did win our fantasy league, I guess I gotta agree with you on some of this stuff.
Trust me, I am not trustworthy at all.
But with that does conclude this week's episode. Ryan, what are your final thoughts?
Thank you, everyone, for continuing to listen to us and support Brew Sports, Touchdown Tuesday, and Run It Back. Please continue to support us and invite anybody that you know that you think would enjoy listening to like Brew Sports and to follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
Yep, I agree with you on that, Ryan. Do want to thank everyone again for listening. This week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. Make sure to listen to us each week. If you're able to live, check us out on YouTube or when we post each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker. Keep an eye out on our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter as well with all that information. If you do happen to search us on Twitter, make sure to look for the handle at TDWN2's podcast. Keep an eye out for our question of the week. That will be posted on both Facebook and Twitter as well. And also give us a like or a follow on social media if you haven't. We're in triple figures on both Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to see those numbers continue to go up. So if you haven't liked or followed us yet, please do so. Again, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, and we look forward to giving you the news in the NFL, college football, and the AAF next week. Good night, everyone.